Hey everybody, welcome back. And if you're new, thanks for stopping by. As the title says, I'm going to hardwire my Dashcam and my FRS and take a step away from computers this week. I have three kits here, but I'm only going to look at this one, the Plozoe, or however you say it. Anyway, it has a mini USB connection and an 11.5-foot cable, which should be plenty and won't have to splice anything today. The other two Van Trip branded ones here are actually for my Tundra, but I'm going to set those aside for another day. I should have bought a fourth one so I could have two in each car, but I never got around it. So I'm going to open up the box, which contains a trim tool to help pull off plastic trim pieces without damaging them, and as well to tuck the wire under the headliner so I don't have to pull it down and possibly cause sagging. It also has several different sizes of these add-a-fuse wires, which should fit most, if not all, the different fuse sizes in any vehicle. I'm only going to need one of these, but it is nice to have the option to choose which fuse I would like to use to plug in the dash cam to. This actually makes it pretty easy to just find a fuse slot that has an accessory power or ignition power. And it also comes with 5 amp fuses here, which makes the process that much easier and don't have to worry about buying anything additional for the installation. The last thing the kit contains is of course the 11.5-foot cable, which has an inline 12 volt to 5 volt converter, which is necessary as you never want to hook your dash cam directly to 12 volts or you'll just fry it. Most, if not all, dash cams are only rated for 5 volts, but I'd recommend double checking your dash cam if it is not an A119 to make sure, as you wouldn't want to underpower it either. So let's get under the hood and take a look at the fuse panel. Here's the main fuse box in my FRS's engine bay, and in order to run the wire through the firewall, I'd have to go all the way to this corner where all the other wiring runs through the firewall, and that distance would eat up a lot of the 11.5 feet that Dashcam hardwire kit came with. If we jump back over to the fuse box, I'll take off the lid just so you can see what it looks like inside. There are many different amperages of fuses in here and a few relays as you can see, but I just don't want to eat up that cable length like I said. So I think the best option is to put back on the lid and close up the hood here and move into the interior of the car. Now if you look at the amount of room I have between my workbench and the car, I honestly should have pulled it out of the garage because this became a little bit of an issue while I was doing the install. There's already not a lot of space in this car, and I ended up having to do some acrobats to squeeze between the door and the door sill, but as you can see where I'm pointing up under the dash just in front of the dead pedal, that's where my other fuse panel is located. So here's the fuse panel I was pointing at in the last kit. As you can see, it is right in front of the firewall, and actually you can see where I would have had to run the wire through, and this makes it a little bit easier. And looking at this panel, you can see this does mostly interior features like the radio, heated seats, which I don't have, but it has fuses for them anyway. I'm assuming the wiring's there, it's just not hooked up to anything, so it has a fuse just in case it grounds itself out. Anyway, what we need to do next is test these fuses with the ignition off to see if there's 12 volts power or not, and then with the ignition on to see when they get their power. That way, they only turn on when I turn the car on. If I hooked it up to a fuse that was constantly on, even when the car's off, they would end up draining my battery pretty fast and take a lot of useless footage. So let me get the multimeter out so I can test which fuses have constant power and which ones only come on with the ignition. If you do decide to use a multimeter like I did and don't have a voltage tester, you will need to set it to 20 volts DC, that way you get a correct reading. For the ground side of the tester, you will see I hooked it up to the metal frame on the back side of the panel with a clip, that way I don't have to worry about holding it the entire time I'm testing. Like I said, this was quite cramped in here, so wasn't the easiest to get in there and see everything without being in a weird position between the door and the door sill. Now, I know the 15 amp fuse that is closest to the firewall is going to have constant power, as it is the main fuse for this panel. But let me get you zoomed in closer, and we'll start testing the other fuses to see which one has constant power and which one we're going to use that only turns on with the ignition. To test your fuses, all you need to do is, of course, have your ground connected to some metal, as you can see there in the right side of the screen, and then touch your positive to the little pins on the tops of the fuses. Now, this one did not have power when the ignition was off, but as it was the ECU ignition fuse, I decided to move one back to the heated seat fuse, which is just behind that little black piece of metal there. Currently, I have the ignition off, and I have the positive side pressed into the heated seat pin there. Sorry my hand got in the way, but I was trying to pull up the multimeter here and balance myself to show you that it had no voltage coming through. So, since it has no voltage coming through, likely this will only turn on with the ignition. So, let me get out of the way, turn on the ignition, and we'll check that again. Now that the ignition is on, let me put the probe on the tester back on the fuse, and as you can see on the multimeter, it says it has about 11.98 volts. So, that is definitely a one I'm going to use for my install here. Now, you may be asking why I didn't use one of the fuse slots that isn't being used by anything. Well, the reason is that I wanted to show you how this works with an existing fuse. Not all vehicles will have a fuse slot that aren't being used, and if I went that route, I would rather pull down the fuse panel and put wiring in the back instead of using the add-a-fuse wire. Just my preference. Also, doing it this way makes it much easier and quicker, but I may move it later on or put my rear dash cam on one of those circuits, which I will show that in a future video. Anyway, as I showed you in that clip, I removed the mounting bolt and back. This is so I could sandwich the ground wire between the plastic and the metal frame, as it is fairly close to the location of the fuses. I didn't need to pull the bolt all the way out, but I did anyway just to show you that there is a metal frame on back that will suffice as a ground. Anyway, here's the 10 amp fuse for the heated seat that I just pulled out with my fuse puller. And I'll take it over to the workbench so I can show you how to plug it into the add-a-fuse adapter. Here is the add-a-fuse adapter I'll be using, and what we'll need to do is take our 10 amp fuse we pulled out of the fuse panel and put it into the bottom one there, closest to the plug that goes back into the fuse panel. As you can see, I did have a little struggle there because I put it in crooked at first, but once I paid closer attention, I was able to get it in there fairly easy. Now that we have that in there, I can go ahead and grab the 5 amp fuse that came with our Dashcam kit. Now, 5 amps is plenty for this because if there is a power issue, I'd rather the fuse blow at 5 amps rather than put, 10, 15, or 20 in there, as it could potentially damage the camera. So, this is plenty and will suffice. When you are installing your add-a-fuse adapter, just make sure you match it up to the fuse you pulled out of your vehicle so it matches up with the fuses and will plug directly back into the fuse panel there. But as they are all snug here, and you can see what it looks like when it's done, I'll go ahead and jump back into my awkward position between the door and the door sill so we can get this all hooked up. Alright, now I'm wedged in here again, so I'll grab our add-a-fuse adapter and just plug it right back in where I pulled the 10 amp fuse from the heated seat location. Once that's all connected, I'll go ahead and grab the other end of the wire, the 11.5 foot cable, and I'll hook up the ground wire first before I hook up the power wire. I do apologize for this clip as my hand got in the way a bit here when I was installing the ground cable, but again, it is close quarters under the dash of the FRS. But now that I have the grounding cable between the plastic and the metal there, I can grab my 10mm ratcheting wrench, tighten down the bolt, and make sure it's nice and snug before moving on. I'm also doing this with pretty limited view, so that's why the ratcheting wrench kind of slipped off there. But in the end, I got it tightened down with minimal issues. Now, if I didn't have the camera there, I'd probably have a bit more space. But anyway, I'll go ahead and connect the power cable to the add-a-fuse adapter, and then we can move on to giving this a nice test before we wire it up. The reason why I'm going to test this out before I hide all the wires and remove all my trim pieces is because I don't want to put the wires back there, put all my trim pieces back on, and then find out something's wrong with the cable or the converter box or something along those lines. So I'll go ahead and turn the ignition on here and make sure it turns on. And success! The camera turns on with the ignition and is recording without issues. I'll test it again here just to be sure. You know what they say, test twice, cut once? That doesn't sound right. Maybe that's wood or something. Anyway, the next step is to get everything tucked behind the panels, which is pretty boring, so I'll speed up the footage for y'all. Hey you, cue up the music please. Thank you. Alright, now that I have tucked all the wires behind the panels, I need to do something with the excess wiring under the dash here. First, I'll go ahead and bundle them together as you see here, and then we'll get the best automotive fastener there is on the market. A zip tie! Please don't take me seriously. But I seriously use these when I need a quick fix for a sagging plastic undertray, or just fender liners that don't want to be cooperative with your lowered car and your wider wheels. Anyway, I'm going to stick them within the dash frame and use another zip tie to hold them there to prevent anything from coming down on my feet while driving. So let me tie this together. I know I'm a little bit slow here, but I had it upside down and of course took me a little longer than I expected. So I'll skip the rest of this boring part and we'll jump over to what it looks like after I got them all bundled up and zip tied. And there they are, all tucked within the dash frame there. And give it that little, this ain't going anywhere. So now, as you can see, my car is a bit dirty, but we have no more wires exposed all the way leading up to the dash cam. And pan across, really bright light, and there's the camera. So let's go ahead and give it another test and make sure it turns on. And it's still working after all that, so we're ready for the road. Now, I no longer have a cable coming out of the USB port here, running across in front of my shifter, and under a panel there to get up to the camera. One quick mention I wanted to make here is that most vehicles these days have curtain airbags, especially if it's a newer vehicle. Make sure if you're taking off your A-pillar trim panel to not cross your wire over the airbag. I'm not sure what would happen during an accident. Maybe the wire would just break and it would deploy normally, but it could cause issues with the airbag deploying properly, break the wire, or even worse, the wire fly out and smack you in the face. Airbags are made to help out during accidents, and a wire smacking you in the face could cause injuries that you wouldn't experience otherwise. Hopefully none of you watching ever get into an accident, but things do happen and could really make things worse. So just make sure it's not in the way of that curtain airbag, and it's best to make sure it is above it rather than below it or across it, as the side curtain airbag does deploy downward and across your side window there. Well, that is all for the install and for this video today. I still have 2 more wiring kits to go for my truck, and I have ordered another for the FRS to hardwire the rear camera so I can free up the 12-volt outlet in my glove box for other uses. When I get that one in, I'll make another video showing you how to use an existing fuse slot that isn't being used like all the ones you saw earlier without using an add a fuse circuit. It probably will involve some soldering and splicing, but when that time comes, I'll show you what I do. I might just do that video when I install the cameras in my Tundra instead, since there's a heck of a lot more space in there than the FRS, and I'll get some better camera angles for y'all. so stay tuned. However, next week I will be stepping back over to computers and checking out how a 9-year-old computer stands up in 2021. I hope this video has helped some of you out if you plan to hardwire your dashcam, and if you have any questions, like always, just let me know below. Also, if you can click that like and subscribe button below, I would really appreciate it as it helps me out. I thank you all for stopping by, hope you have a great rest of your day, and take care.